father sold a pregnant obese girl for $2. Then the mountain man did the unthinkable to her. On a freezing night, outside a dusty saloon, a desperate father drags his own daughter to the auction block and sells her like cattle. The crowd laughs. The coins clink. Her life seems over. But then a scarred mountain man steps forward. He doesn't mock her. He doesn't walk away. He does something so shocking, the whole town falls silent. He takes her hand, lifts her into his wagon, and promises protection no one expected. Yet whispers stir. A crook judge, a father's lies, a hidden deed that could change everything. As threats close in, she must find the courage to stand, and he must risk everything to keep her free. What happens when a woman the world tried to throw away discovers she holds the key to her own future? And will the unthinkable act of one mountain man be enough to save them both? Before we begin, I invite you to take a breath. This space is for the quiet believers, the ones who know small kindnesses can ripple into something greater. The bitter Colorado wind howled through the mining town's empty streets, rattling wooden signs and whistling between buildings. Mary Ellen Harper stood trembling at the hitching post, her father's iron grip on her arm, the only thing keeping her upright. The heavy wool of her dress did little to shield her from the biting cold or the burning shame that colored her cheeks. 2 bits. Someone called from the crowd of miners spilling out of the saloon. Laughter followed, cruel and sharp as icicles. Quarter ain't enough for my worthless girl. Her father slurred, swaying on his feet. The smell of cheap whiskey rolled off him in waves. She eats more than a mule, but works half as hard. He yanked her arm, making her stumble. Her free hand went instinctively to her swollen belly, protecting the child within. Tears leaked from Mary Ellen's eyes, freezing on her cheeks in the harsh wind. She kept her gaze fixed on the muddy ground, unable to meet the leering faces of the men around her. Their coins clinked as they tossed them at her feet, making sport of her humiliation. 50 cents, another voice called. $1, shouted someone else. The sound of heavy boots crunching in the frozen mud cut through the taunts. The crowd fell silent as Mateo Boone stepped forward. Mary Ellen had seen him before, trading furs in town, but never this close. Scars crossed his weathered face like trails on a map, and his dark eyes held a depth of something she couldn't name. Not cruelty, like the others, but something else entirely. Without a word, Mateo reached into his coat and pulled out $2 silver. The coins gleamed in the weak winter sunlight as he pressed them into her father's palm. The old man's fingers closed greedily around them, a bark of laughter escaping his throat. "Sold," her father declared, shoving her roughly toward Mateo. "She's your problem now, mountain man." Mary Ellen stumbled, expecting to hit the ground, but strong hands caught her with surprising gentleness. Mateo steadied her, then began unbuckling his heavy fur cloak. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he wrapped it carefully around her shoulders, tucking it close to shield her from the wind. "What's he gonna do with her?" Someone whispered loudly. "Reckon he's gone soft in the head." Another responded, but Mateo paid them no mind. He kept one hand at Mary Ellen's elbow, supporting but not gripping, and guided her toward his wagon. The ancient vehicle stood at the edge of the street, loaded with furs and supplies. A tired-looking bay horse stomped its foot impatiently in the traces. Mary Ellen's heart hammered in her chest as Mateo helped her up onto the wagon seat. She had gone from being her father's property to belonging to this stranger in the space of $2 silver. Would he be cruel? Would he? She couldn't finish the thought. The wagon's wooden seat creaked as Mateo climbed up beside her. He clicked his tongue at the horse and shook the reins. The crowd parted, their earlier mockery replaced by confused silence as the wagon began to move. Mary Ellen clutched the fur cloak tighter around herself, stealing glances at the mountain man's profile. His expression remained unreadable as they rattled past the last buildings of town. The wind still bit at her face, but the cloak's warmth began to seep into her bones, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and pine. She jumped when Matteo finally spoke, his voice low and rough like river stones. "You're safe now, Miss Harper." The simple words cracked something inside her. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these weren't frozen by shame. They were warm with something that felt dangerously like hope. Still, uncertainty gnawed at her heart. What would this quiet mountain man expect of her? What sort of life awaited her now? The wagon continued its steady pace away from town, wheels crunching through patches of old snow. Behind them, the sounds of the town faded until there was nothing but the creak of harness leather, the horses' steady hoof beats, and the endless sighing of the wind through bare branches. Mary Ellen sat rigid on the seat, one hand still pressed protectively over her unborn child. She trembled, though whether from cold or fear, she couldn't say. The mountain man's unexpected kindness had saved her from public humiliation, but she had no way of knowing if her fate had truly improved or if worse trials lay ahead. The wagon rattled onward into the gathering dusk, carrying her toward an unknown future with this mysterious man who had purchased her for the price of $2 silver. The wagon creaked and swayed as Matteo guided his horse along the icy mountain trail. Frozen ruts caught the wooden wheels, making the vehicle lurch and shudder. Mary Ellen gripped the seat with one hand, the other still protective over her middle. The fur cloak enveloped her like a cocoon, but she remained rigid, too numb with cold and shocked to speak. Pine branches heavy with snow loomed overhead, their shadows dancing across the path in the fading light. The horse's breath came out in great cloudy puffs as it plodded steadily upward. Matteo sat beside her, silent but alert, his eyes constantly scanning the darkening forest. Hours passed. Mary Ellen drifted in and out of an exhausted daze, startling awake whenever the wagon hit a particularly deep rut. The moon rose, casting silver light through the trees. Still, they climbed higher into the mountain's as the first pale fingers of dawn crept across the sky. Matteo finally turned the wagon onto a narrow track between towering pines. Mary Ellen blinked, trying to focus her tired eyes. A small clearing opened before them, and there, nestled against the hillside, stood a rough-hewn log cabin. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, rising straight up in the still morning air. "Home," Matteo said simply, pulling the wagon to a stop. Mary Ellen stared at the line shack. It was small but solid-looking, with a pitched roof and a stack of firewood piled neatly against one wall. After the endless hours of travel, the sight of shelter made her throat tight with emotion she couldn't name. Matteo helped her down from the wagon, steadying her when her stiff legs threatened to buckle. He led her to the cabin door, opened it, and gestured for her to enter. The interior was dim but warm. A banked fire glowed in the hearth, and the single room smelled of wood smoke and pine. Simple furnishings filled the space, a narrow bed against one wall, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves holding provisions and cooking implements. Matteo moved straight to the fireplace, adding logs and stirring the embers until flames leaped up. He hung a pot over the fire and began adding ingredients from his store's dried meat, vegetables, herbs. The familiar domestic sounds made Mary Ellen's head spin with confusion. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. "You need food." She perched on the edge of the seat, watching as he worked. When he set a bowl of steaming stew and a chunk of bread before her, her stomach cramped with hunger. But suspicion made her hesitate. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you buy me?" Matteo paused in his movements, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. "Because no one else would treat you as human." The simple truth in his words struck her like a physical blow. She picked up the spoon with trembling fingers and began to eat, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. As night fell, Matteo arranged blankets near the hearth for her to sleep. He took his rifle and stepped outside, settling onto the porch too. "Keep watch." Through the cabin's single window, Mary Ellen could see his silhouette, still as stone, listening for wolves and perhaps for the sound of pursuit. The thought of her father following made her shudder, but exhaustion soon pulled her into deep sleep. Morning light spilled through the window when she woke, feeling oddly rested despite everything. As she sat up, something caught her eye. Her worn coat, which she discarded by the door, hung on a peg, but it was different. The torn sleeve had been mended with neat stitches, and the missing buttons replaced. On the table beside her lay a pair of wool gloves, well worn but warm. She recognized them as the ones Matteo had worn yesterday. Now they were meant for her. Hands. The sound of an axe splitting wood came from outside. Mary Ellen went to the window and watched Matteo working, his steady rhythm speaking of long practice. The morning sun caught the frost in his beard and the scars on his weathered face. She touched the mended sleeve of her coat, then the soft wool of the gloves. Each small kindness felt like a key turning in a rusted lock inside her heart. The idea that someone could help without wanting to hurt her seemed impossible. Yet here was the proof. Without conscious thought, she began to hum softly, an old hymn her mother had sung long ago. The familiar melody filled the warm cabin, and for the first time in years, Mary Ellen felt something like peace settle over her shoulders, as gentle as the morning light streaming through the window. Several days passed in quiet routine at the morning light streaming through the window. Several days passed in quiet routine at the line shack. Mary Ellen found herself settling into a rhythm, helping with cooking and mending while Matteo tended to his traps and chopped wood. The evening sun cast long shadows through the cabin windows as they finished a hearty supper of venison stew, the savory aroma still lingering in the warm air. Mary Ellen was clearing away the wooden bowls when the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the evening silence. The steady crunch of horses' hooves in snow grew louder, and Matteo rose from his chair, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle propped by the door. "Stay back," he murmured to Mary Ellen, who had frozen in place, her face gone pale. The bowls trembled in her hands as she set them down. Matteo opened the heavy wooden door, letting in a gust of cold air. Outside, Deputy Carter Wells sat astride his horse, snow dusting his shoulders and hat brim. The lawman's face was drawn with weariness, his badge catching the last light of day. "Evening, Boone," the deputy said, dismounting with a creak of leather. His boots crunched in the fresh snow as he approached the porch. "Need to have a word." Matteo stepped aside, allowing Carter to enter the cabin. The deputy removed his hat, nodding respectfully to Mary Ellen, who had retreated to the far corner near the hearth. His eyes took in the domestic scene, the remains of supper, the neat stack of mended clothes, the quiet order of the place. "Your father's raising hell in town," Carter said without preamble, addressing Mary Ellen directly. "Claims Boone here took you unlawful-like, demanding your return." Mary Ellen's hands clutched at her apron, her knuckles white. "I won't go back," she whispered, though her voice shook. "He was selling me like an animal." The deputy sighed, running a hand over his weathered face. "I understand that, miss. But the law," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "The judge in town, he tends to side with fathers in matters of family rights. Your pa's got papers showing his legal guardianship." "Papers don't make right," Matteo said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of steel. "She's of age. She's free under my roof." Carter turned to face the mountain man, his expression troubled. "The law isn't always just, Boone. You know that as well as I do. I'm here as a friend, warning you what's coming." Mary Ellen sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The baby kicked inside her, as if sensing her distress. "The law would send me back to him?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "After what he did?" The deputy shifted uncomfortably, his fingers worrying the brim of his hat. "I've seen too many times where money and influence speak louder than right and wrong. Your pa's been meeting with Judge Harrison and that man." He shook his head. "Well, let's just say he's known for certain leanings in these matters." Mateo moved to stand between the deputy and Mary Ellen, his stance protective. "No one's taking her anywhere against her will." "I hoped you'd say that," Carter replied, settling his hat back on his head. "Just thought you should know what's brewing. Might be wise to consider your options before things come to a head." The deputy moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Boone, I reckon you did right by her. But be careful, the law can be a funny thing out here." They watched through the window as Carter mounted up and rode away, his horse's hoofbeats fading into the gathering darkness. Mary Ellen began to tremble, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm still trapped," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No matter where I go, he'll find a way to control me." Mateo stoked the fire, adding another log. The flames cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls as he turned to face her. "No lawman will drag you from here without stepping over me first," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "That's a promise." Mary Ellen looked up at him, seeing the unwavering conviction in his scarred face. She held onto his words like a shield against her fears, letting them sink deep into her heart where hope had begun to take root. Outside, snow began to fall heavily, the thick flakes swirling in the darkness. The storm moved in quickly, sealing them away from the world beyond their small clearing. Mary Ellen listened to the soft hiss of snow against the windows and watched Mateo check the door's heavy bar. Despite her lingering fear, she felt safer here than she had in years. The fire dimmed slowly, its warmth wrapping around her like a blanket. She drifted off to sleep in her chair by the hearth, Mateo's promise echoing in her mind. Through the night, the snow continued to fall, building drifts against the cabin walls and turning their world white and silent. Morning dawned gray and heavy, the snow from the night before blanketing the world in hushed white. Mary Ellen stood at the cabin window, her shoulders slumped with the weight of yesterday's news. The threat of her father's legal action hung over her like a dark cloud. Mateo watched her from across the room as he pulled on his boots. He recognized the look of someone drowning in helplessness. "Time you learned some things," he said, breaking the silence. "Put on those wool gloves I gave you." Mary Ellen turned, surprise crossing her face. "Learn what?" "How to survive out here," he replied, reaching for his coat. "Can't let fear keep you inside forever." Outside, the cold air bit at their faces. Mateo led her to the woodpile, where split logs waited alongside a stack of wedges and a heavy maul. He demonstrated how to place the wedge against the grain of a log. "Like this," he said, tapping the wedge into position. "Start gentle, then give it strength." The maul came down with practiced precision, and the log split clean. Mary Ellen's first attempts were clumsy. The wedge skittered sideways, and her strikes lacked power. But Mateo showed patience, adjusting her grip and stance until she managed to split her first piece of kindling. The sound of wood cracking apart was surprisingly satisfying. "Well done," Mateo nodded, and Mary Ellen felt a flutter of pride in her chest. They moved deeper into the pines, where Mateo showed her how to identify trees heavy with resin. "Best fire starter there is," he explained, demonstrating how to collect the sticky substance with a knife. "This here will catch spark even in wet weather." Mary Ellen's fingers grew sticky with pine sap, but she didn't mind. Each new skill felt like a small victory over helplessness. Near a game trail, Mateo taught her to set simple snares. "Rabbits run these paths," he explained, his hands moving with practiced ease as he shaped wire into loops. "They'll keep us fed when bigger game is scarce." At midday, they sat on a fallen log while Mateo shared dried apple slices and hot coffee from his canteen. The warm drink chased away the chill, and Mary Ellen wrapped her hands around the tin. Cup gratefully. Had a wife once, Mateo said suddenly, his voice soft against the winter quiet. Sarah, and a little girl named Grace. He paused, taking a long drink of coffee. Fever took them both, 6 years ago. Nothing I could do but watch them slip away. Mary Ellen listened, understanding blooming in her heart. His kindness wasn't just decency. It was born from knowing how it felt to be helpless, to lose everything. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Mateo nodded, offering her another apple slice. Life teaches hard lessons, but it also shows us how to help others if we're willing to learn. They returned to the cabin as afternoon shadows lengthened. Mary Ellen took charge of cooking dinner, adding herbs she remembered from her mother's teaching to the pot of beans. The familiar work felt different now, like choice rather than obligation. When Mateo took his first bite, his eyebrows rose. These are good, he said, reaching for more. Real good. A smile spread across Mary Ellen's face, small at first, then growing. She couldn't remember the last time she'd smiled without trying to hide it. The simple praise warmed her more than the fire. As night settled in, Mary Ellen found herself humming while she mended a tear in one of Mateo's shirts. The tune was an old hymn her mother had sung during evening chores, one about finding shelter in storms. The familiar melody filled the cabins. Corners with something that felt like peace. Near the hearth, Mateo sat sharpening his knife by lamplight. The steady scrape of stone against steel paused, and Mary Ellen heard a deep voice quietly join her hymn. She glanced up to find Mateo's eyes distant with memory, his weathered hands still on the blade. The song ended softly, leaving them in comfortable silence. Mary Ellen saw moisture in the corner of Mateo's eye before he blinked it away, returning to his knife work. But something had shifted in the cabin's atmosphere, as if their shared music had built a bridge between their separate sorrows. The lamp flickered gently as Mary Ellen continued her mending, the hymn still echoing in her heart. Outside, snow began falling again, but inside the cabin, two wounded souls found healing in simple work and shared songs. Sunday morning arrived with a break in the winter weather. Pale sunlight filtered through dissipating clouds as Mateo hitched his mule to the wagon. Mary Ellen emerged from the cabin wearing her freshly pressed dress, the only one she owned, now clean and mended. Ready? Mateo asked, extending his hand. To help her onto the wagon seat, Mary Ellen hesitated, her fingers twisting the worn fabric of her shawl. What if Father's there? Then we'll deal with it, Mateo said firmly. Can't hide forever. Besides, the Lord's house should be open to all. The wagon wheels creaked along the mountain road as they descended into town. Mary Ellen's heart quickened. As they passed the first buildings, townsfolk paused in their Sunday morning routines, faces turning to watch. Whispers followed their progress down Main Street. Did you hear? The mountain man and that farmer's girl, bold as brass, coming to church. Mateo kept his eyes forward, his jaw set. He guided the mule to a hitching post near the white clapboard church. The small building's fresh paint gleamed in the morning light, its bell tower reaching toward heaven like a finger pointing the way. Inside, oil lamps cast a warm glow over rough-hewn pews. Reverend Josiah Clark stood at the door, greeting his flock. His weathered face creased into a genuine smile when he saw them. Welcome, welcome, he said, extending both hands, one to Mateo, one to Mary Ellen. It does my heart good to see you here. Mary Ellen felt tears prick her eyes at his kindness. They found seats near the back, but the Reverend's warm welcome seemed to soften the stares of other congregants. As the service began, familiar hymns washed over her like healing water. She sang softly at first, then with growing strength as Mateo's deep voice joined hers. After the final Amen, while folks gathered for coffee and conversation, Reverend Clark approached their pew. Miss Harper, might I have a word? Mateo nodded encouragingly, and Mary Ellen followed the preacher to his small study off the sanctuary. Afternoon light streamed through a single window, illuminating shelves of books and papers. "You favor your mother," Reverend Clark said softly, studying her face. Elizabeth was a woman of remarkable faith. She never missed a service, even during the hardest times. Mary Ellen's breath caught. Few people ever mentioned her mother anymore. "You knew her well?" "I did." He settled into a worn leather chair, gesturing for her to sit. "She worried about you, especially near the end. That's why she came to me one day, about a year before she passed." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Your mother deeded you a piece of land, 20 acres along Clear Creek, good soil, water rights included. She wanted to ensure you'd have independence one day." Mary Ellen's hands trembled in her lap. "But I never knew." "No," the Reverend's face darkened. "Your father intercepted the document before I could file it properly. He claimed he was protecting family interests, but he shook his head. The deed exists, Mary Ellen. If found, it would give you legal claim to your own property and your own life." Hope bloomed in Mary Ellen's chest, fragile but insistent. She pressed her hand to her heart, feeling her child move within her. "The deed, could it still be valid?" "With my testimony and the proper documentation, yes. But finding it," he spread his hands, "that's in God's hands now." The ride home was quiet, both Mary Ellen and Mateo lost in thought as the wagon climbed back into the mountains. Dusk painted the snow-covered peaks in shades of purple and gold by the time they reached the cabin. As Mary Ellen prepared for bed, Mateo stoked the fire. "Reverend Clark's news," he said carefully. "It gives you a chance." "If we can find the deed," she replied, her voice small. "We'll pray on it," Mateo said simply. "The Lord works in ways we can't always see." Those words stayed with Mary Ellen as she knelt beside her cot that night. The cabin was silent except for the popping of the fire and Mateo's quiet breathing from his bedroll near the hearth. Clasping her hands, she began to whisper the prayer her mother had taught her as a child. "Our Father, who art in heaven." The familiar words fell from her lips like water from a spring long dried up. Each phrase seemed to carry new meaning now. As she spoke of daily bread and deliverance from evil, Mary Ellen felt something shift inside her, a loosening of old bonds, a strengthening of spirit. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt truly connected to both heaven and earth. Perhaps God hadn't abandoned her after all. Perhaps, like the hidden deed, His presence had been there all along, waiting to be rediscovered. A week of snow and ice had kept them isolated at the line shack, but supplies were running low. The morning dawned clear and cold as Mateo hitched the wagon for the trip into town. Mary Ellen wrapped herself in layers, her advancing pregnancy making her movements careful and deliberate. "Best get there early," Mateo said, helping her up onto the wagon seat. "Market day brings out all sorts." The mountain air bit at their faces as they descended into the valley. Mary Ellen's heart quickened as the town came into view, smoke rising from chimneys against the pale winter sky. Market day meant crowds, and crowds meant stairs. As they rolled down Main Street, the whispers started immediately. Women paused in their shopping to point and murmur behind gloved hands. A group of men lounging outside the saloon made no effort to lower their voices. "Looks like the mountain man's pet cow is getting fatter. Reckon that babe'll come out part bear." Mary Ellen's cheeks burned, but Mateo's arm stayed steady around hers as he helped her down from the wagon. He walked tall beside her, his scarred face set in stern lines that dared anyone to come closer. The bell above Whitaker's Mercantile jingled as they entered. Inside, the store smelled of coffee beans, leather, and fresh-cut wood. Mary Ellen's eyes were drawn to a display of fabrics near the window. She touched a bolt of soft calico printed with tiny blue flowers. "Would make fine baby clothes," she said softly, almost to herself. Mrs. Whitaker, the shopkeeper's wife, approached with hesitation in her step. She glanced between Mary Ellen and Mateo, clearly unsure how to treat them. 3 yards, if you please, Mary Ellen said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Her fingers traced the fabric's pattern, imagining tiny gowns and blankets. Mrs. Whitaker looked to her husband behind the counter. Mr. Whitaker met Mateo's unwavering gaze, then gave a slight nod. Of course, Mrs. Whitaker said, her tone warming slightly. She measured and cut the fabric with practiced moves, wrapping it carefully in brown paper. While Mary Ellen selected the fabric, Mateo gathered their other supplies: coffee, flour, salt, and ammunition. He paid without comment, though the total was dear. Outside, he stowed their purchases in the wagon while Mary Ellen clutched her precious package of calico. A group of miners had gathered nearby, still feeling bold from their morning drinks. One elbowed another, grinning. "Hey, mountain man, how much you want for her?" "I'll give you $3. That's a whole $1 more than you paid." The others guffawed, but their laughter died when Mateo turned. His eyes held the cold gleam of a mountain winter, his hand resting casually near his belt knife. The miners suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. The ride home was quiet, but Mary Ellen held her head higher than before. As they climbed back into the mountains, Mateo finally spoke. "You did well today. They were cruel," she said softly. "People often are, but you showed more dignity than the lot of them." That evening, Mary Ellen sat by the fireplace, the lantern casting a warm glow as she carefully cut patterns from the pyre. Calico. Her mother had taught her to sew when she was young, and the familiar motions brought comfort. Each snip of the scissors felt like a small act of defiance against those who thought her worthless. Mateo sat in his chair by the fire, pipe smoke curling lazily toward the ceiling. His presence was solid, dependable as the mountains themselves. The cabin felt different now, not just a shelter, but a home. The walls seemed to hold warmth beyond what the fire provided. Mary Ellen's hands moved steadily over the fabric as she worked. Each tiny garment taking shape under her fingers represented hope, hope for her child, hope for herself. She was no longer just the farmer's unwanted daughter. Here, in this rough cabin with this quiet man, she had found something she'd thought forever lost: belonging. She hummed softly as she worked, an old lullaby her mother used to sing. The familiar tune filled the cabin, mixing with the crackle of the fire and the soft puffing of Mateo's pipe. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside, Mary Ellen felt warmer than she had in years. Mateo watched her work, pride showing in his eyes. He had offered shelter to a desperate woman, but she was becoming so much more: a partner in this mountain life, someone who faced down scorn with quiet strength. The cabin had been just a place to weather the seasons, but now, with Mary Ellen's presence, it was becoming a true home. As the evening deepened, Mary Ellen held up a tiny gown she had cut from the calico. Tomorrow she would begin stitching it together, creating something new from something that had once been just a length of fabric, much like she herself was being remade, stitch by careful stitch, into someone stronger than before. The days flowed like the mountain streams, steady and gentle. Mary Ellen found peace in the rhythm of her needle, pushing it through soft calico as she crafted tiny garments by the hearth. The firelight danced across her work while winter winds whistled outside the cabin walls. Mateo kept busy with his own tasks. The steady thump of his hammer echoed as he repaired loose shingles on the roof, determined to keep their shelter sound. Inside, he oiled tools and mended broken handles, his skilled hands moving with practiced ease. Their meals were simple fare: venison stew, cornbread, dried apples, but shared with growing comfort. Mary Ellen discovered Mateo's unexpected sweet tooth when she baked a honey cake using precious stored supplies. His eyes had lit up like a child's at the first bite. "Reminds me of market days down in Denver," he said, savoring each crumb. "Though this is better than any I bought there." Mary Ellen ducked her head at the praise, but smiled. My mother taught me that recipe. She said a little sweetness makes any day better. These small exchanges grew more frequent, like wildflowers pushing through snow. Mateo's quiet chuckle at her attempts to stack firewood, her gentle teasing when he burned the beans. Their silence grew comfortable rather than strained. One evening, as shadows lengthened across the plank floor, Mary Ellen's fingers paused on her sewing. The firelight cast a warm glow as she began to sing, her voice clear and sweet in the quiet. Cabin. It was her mother's favorite hymn, one she hadn't sung in full since childhood. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like May. Once was lost, but now and found, was blind, but now I see. Her voice gained strength with each verse, filling the cabin with remembered comfort. When she finished, she looked up to find Mateo staring into the fire, his weathered cheeks glistening. "Sarah used to sing that," he said softly, speaking of his late wife for the first time in days. "Every Sunday morning, while she made breakfast, little James would try to sing along, though he barely knew the words." His voice caught on his son's name. Mary Ellen's hands stilled on her sewing. How old was he? 4 summers. Mateo's fingers worked at a knot in the piece of leather he was mending. The fever took them both within days of each other. The silence that followed was heavy with shared grief, yet somehow warmer than before. Their separate sorrows seemed to weave together like the threads in Mary Ellen's needlework, creating something new and strong. She returned to her sewing, working on a delicate white bonnet trimmed with the last of her lace. The cabin filled with peaceful sounds, the crack of the fire, the whisper of thread through fabric, Mateo's knife scraping leather. Later, when Mateo stepped outside to check the weather, Mary Ellen held the half-finished bonnet to her swollen belly. Her voice was barely a whisper, but filled with fierce tenderness. "This child will be born loved." She didn't know Mateo had returned to the doorway. He stood silent, watching her cradle the tiny garment against herself, her face soft with hope. His head bowed and his lips moved in silent prayer, not for himself this time, but for her strength, for the child, for this fragile new thing growing. Between them all, the moment passed quietly as snow began to fall outside. Mary Ellen returned to her sewing, and Mateo moved to bank the fire for the night. But something had shifted, like spring ice breaking up on the river. Their shared grief had carved a channel for understanding to flow between them. Mary Ellen worked late into the evening, her needle flashing in the lamplight as she finished the bonnet's tiny seams. Mateo sat in his chair, whittling a small wooden horse. Though he hadn't said it was for the baby, they both knew. The comfortable silence wrapped around them like a quilt, patched together from broken pieces but warming them both. The peaceful rhythm of their days shattered one bitter afternoon. Mary Ellen was stirring a pot of bean soup when hoofbeats crunched through the frozen yard. Mateo's hand moved instinctively to his rifle before he recognized Deputy Carter's dun horse through the frosted window. The deputy's face was drawn as he stamped snow from his boots at the threshold. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usual steady demeanor seemed shaken. Mary Ellen's heart squeezed tight at his expression. "Best come in from the cold, Deputy," Mateo said, pulling out their only spare chair. Carter settled heavily by the cold day fire, accepting a tin cup of coffee from Mary Ellen with a distracted nod. "Wish I brought better news," he said, warming his hands around the cup. "Your father's been making quite a scene in town, Miss Harper." Mary Ellen's hands twisted in her apron. "What's he saying?" "He's been haunting every saloon from here too. Silver Creek, waving papers and bragging how he'll drag you back home." Carter's mouth set in a grim line. "Claims he's got documents proving his legal authority over you, regardless of any sale." Mateo's shoulders stiffened. "What kind of documents?" "Can't say for certain. He won't show them to me directly." Carter took a long sip of coffee. "But from what I glimpsed, they look mighty suspicious. Dates don't quite match up, and the judge's signature." He shook his head. I reckon they're forged, but that may not matter much. How so? Mateo's voice was dangerously quiet. Judge Matthews has been known to rule in favor of whoever lines his pockets deepest. Carter met Mateo's eyes. Your father's been flashing silver around town, boasting how he'll make things right in court. Mary Ellen sank onto her stool, one hand pressed against her belly. All their careful peace, the gentle hope they'd built, it felt like sand slipping through her fingers. He can't take me back, she whispered. I won't survive it this time. No one's taking you anywhere. Mateo growled. He began pacing the cabin's length, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. The floorboards creaked under his heavy steps. Carter finished his coffee and stood, settling his hat back on his head. I'll keep watching, try to get a better look at those papers, but you should prepare yourselves. Your father's got friends in low places, and they're stirring up trouble. Much obliged for the warning, Mateo said, walking the deputy to the door. Carter paused on the threshold. For what it's worth, I've seen how you two look after each other. Ain't natural for a father to treat his child like chattel. But the law, he sighed. Sometimes the law ain't as just as it ought to be. After the deputy rode away, storm clouds began gathering over the mountains. Mary Ellen tried to keep her hands steady as she worked on her sewing, but every shadow made her flinch. Mateo continued his restless pacing, checking the windows, testing the door's latch, running his thumb along his rifle's stock. By nightfall, the storm broke over them. Wind howled through the pine boughs, rattling the cabin's walls. Lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the ground. Mary Ellen lay on her cot but couldn't sleep, her mind spinning with fear. A particularly loud crack of thunder startled her fully awake. In the flash of lightning that followed, she saw Mateo kneeling by the dying fire. His head was bowed, hands clasped tight, lips moving in fervent prayer. Lord, she heard him whisper between thunderclaps, I ain't asked much of you since Sarah and James, but this girl needs your protection. Show me how to keep her safe. Guide my path. Don't let evil triumph here. Mary Ellen's throat tightened. Slowly, she rose from her cot and crossed to kneel beside him. Her hand found his in the darkness, fingers intertwining with his work-roughened ones. He started at her touch but didn't pull away. Together, they prayed. In the firelight, for strength, for wisdom, for justice to prevail over corruption. Mary Ellen's soft voice joined Mateo's deeper one, their words weaving together like smoke rising to heaven. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside their joined hands created an island of calm. Whatever comes, Mateo said when they finally fell. Silent, we'll face it together. Mary Ellen squeezed his hand, drawing courage from his strength. The baby kicked beneath her heart, as if adding its own determination to their resolve. Though fear still fluttered in her chest, she felt steadier. God had led her to this shelter, to this good man's protection. Surely he wouldn't abandon them. Now the fire crackled low, casting their shadows long against the cabin wall. Two figures kneeling side by side, hands clasped, heads bowed in shared purpose. Whatever her father planned, whatever corrupt justice threatened, they would meet it with faith and unity. Dawn broke pale and cold over the line shack. Mary Ellen stirred beans for breakfast while Mateo checked his trap lines. The quiet morning shattered as gunshots cracked through the air, echoing off the mountainsides. Birds scattered from the trees in frightened clouds. Mary Ellen dropped her spoon, her heart hammering. Through the window, she glimpsed riders emerging from the tree line. 5 men, their faces hard in the early light. Her father sat astride, his bay mare at their center, swaying slightly. Even at this distance, she could tell he had been drinking. Mateo burst through the door, rifle in hand. Get back from the windows, he ordered, his voice tight. Stay hidden in the root cellar. But, she started. Now, Mary Ellen. His eyes were fierce with concern. She hurried to obey, but paused at the cellar door. More shots rang out, closer. This time, the riders were shooting into the air, their weapons pointed skyward in clear warning. Horses whinnied, stamping nervously at the noise. Mary Ellen Harper. Her father's voice boomed across the yard, slurred but full of rage. "Get out here, girl. Time to come home where you belong." Mary Ellen's hands trembled as she gripped the cellar door. Through gaps in the floorboards, she watched Mateo position himself by the window, rifle ready but not yet raised. "She ain't." "Your property, Harper," Mateo called back, his voice steady. "She's a free woman." "Free?" her father spat. "Ain't nothing free about her. My blood, my say-so. Them's the laws of nature." The hired guns spread out, flanking the cabin. Their boots crunched in the frost-covered grass. Mary Ellen recognized one as Jake Winters, a notorious troublemaker from town. Her father must have spent considerable silver to hire such men. "Last chance, mountain man," her father shouted. "Send her out peaceful-like, or we'll smoke you both out." Something snapped inside Mary Ellen. Years of cowering, of accepting abuse, of believing she deserved no better. It all crystallized into a sharp, bright anger. Before Mateo could stop her, she pushed open the cabin door and stepped onto the porch. "No," she said, her voice carrying clear in the morning air. "I will not go back, Mary Ellen." Mateo hissed, but she stood her ground. Her father's face purpled with rage. "You ungrateful. I am not yours to sell or trade," Mary Ellen continued, her voice growing stronger. "I am carrying a child, and I mean to give it a better life than you gave me." The hired guns shifted uncomfortably, looking between father and daughter. Even Jake Winters seemed unsettled by the raw emotion in her words. "Why, you insolent!" Her father kicked his horse forward, but hoofbeats on the trail made everyone freeze. "Deputy." Carter rode into view, his badge catching the morning light. He assessed the scene with practiced eyes, the armed men. Mary Ellen on the porch, Mateo's rifle barrel visible through the window. "Quite a gathering for such an early hour," Carter drawled, but his hand rested near his holster. "Anyone care to explain?" "Just collecting what's mine," Harper blustered, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Seems to me Miss Harper's made her wishes clear," Carter said. He turned to the hired guns. "Mighty interesting company you're keeping, Jake. Sheriff might want to hear about that." The threat hung in the air. After a tense moment, Jake Winters lowered his rifle. "Come on, boys," he muttered. "This ain't worth the silver." One by one, the hired guns turned their horses, melting back into the trees. Mary Ellen's father remained, swaying in his saddle, his face stood with thwarted rage. "This ain't over," he snarled. "I got papers being drawn up. Judge'll see things proper." He yanked his horse around. "You mark my words, I'll be back with the law behind me." They watched him ride away, his curses fading into the morning air. Only when the last hoofbeat died away did Mary Ellen's legs give out. She sank to the porch steps, shaking with delayed terror and triumph. Mateo was beside her in an instant, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," he said, but pride warmed his voice. Deputy Carter dismounted, leading his horse to the water trough. "He means to do it, you know. He's been in the judge's ear these past days." Mary Ellen buried her face in her hands, hot tears spilling through her fingers. The baby kicked inside her as if sensing her distress. But beneath the fear and exhaustion, a small flame of pride burned. For the first time in her life, she had stood up to her father, had found her voice and used it. "We'll face that challenge when it comes," Mateo said, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Right now there's breakfast to be seen to. Deputy, you're welcome to share our beans, seeing as you rode out so early on our account." Mary Ellen wiped her eyes and stood, drawing strength from Mateo's quiet support. Whatever her father planned next, she would meet it standing tall. She was not the same frightened girl who had arrived at this cabin in the snow. She was becoming someone new, someone stronger. 2 days after the confrontation, Mary Ellen was hanging laundry in the crisp morning air when dust rose on the trail. Her heart seized as 3 riders emerged from the pines. She recognized Judge Matthew's portly figure atop his gray stallion. Flanked by 2 deputies, Mateo stepped out of the cabin, jaw tight. He had been expecting this since Deputy Carter's warning, but the sight still made his shoulders tense. Judge Matthews dismounted with a grunt, pulling a rolled document from his saddlebag. His jowls quivered as he read aloud. By order of this court, Mateo Boone is charged with the unlawful detention and kidnapping of one Mary Ellen Harper, being the legal dependent of Samuel Harper. That's a lie, Mary Ellen cried, dropping her wash basket. He saved me. The judge ignored her outburst. Furthermore, the accused did purchase said dependent in an illegal transaction, constituting human trafficking under territorial law. Mateo's face darkened. You know that ain't what happened. I stopped her being sold like cattle. The law sees what it wishes to see, Judge Matthews replied, his thin smile never reaching his eyes. Deputies, take him into custody. The deputies dismounted, drawing iron. Mary Ellen rushed to Mateo's side, clinging to his arm. No, you can't take him. Step aside, miss, one deputy ordered. Reaching for his handcuffs, Mateo gently disentangled himself from Mary Ellen's grip. Don't fight them, he murmured. It'll only make things worse. Tears streamed down her face as the deputies bound Mateo's wrists. He stood tall, dignity unbroken, even in chains. The hearing will be day after tomorrow, Judge Matthews announced. Miss Harper, you'll be returned to your father's custody until then. I won't go, Mary Ellen declared, voice shaking but determined. This is my home now. The judge's face reddened. Now see here. The law says nothing about where she must reside pending hearing, one deputy interjected, surprising them all. Long as she appears in court. Judge Matthews scowled but couldn't argue. Very well. 2 days, Miss Harper. We'll expect you both in court, he turned to Mateo. Come along, Mr. Boone. The jail awaits. Mary Ellen watched helplessly as they led Mateo to his horse. He managed to catch her eye one last time. Be strong, he called. Truth will out. She stood rooted until the riders disappeared into the trees, taking Mateo with them. Only then did her legs give way. She sank to the cabin steps, shoulders heaving with sobs. Hours passed. As evening fell, Mary Ellen forced herself to move. She built up the fire and took out her sewing basket. The rhythmic motion of needle and thread had always calmed her mind. Through her tears, she worked on the baby's clothes, praying with each stitch. Lord, she whispered, give me strength to face what's coming. Help me stand tall, like Mateo taught me. A knock at the door startled her. She grabbed Mateo's spare rifle before calling out, Who's there? It's Reverend Josiah, child. Relief flooded through her as she opened the door. The preacher's kind face was creased with concern. I heard what happened. May I come in? Mary Ellen nodded, returning to her sewing chair. The preacher settled nearby, warming his hands at the fire. I've been searching church records, he said. Your mother's deed exists, Mary Ellen. I'm certain of it. She showed it to me herself, not long before she passed. Hope flickered in Mary Ellen's chest. Can you find it in time? I'll keep looking through the night if I must. He leaned forward earnestly. But you'll need to testify, child. Tell the court what really happened that night at the auction post. Mary Ellen's hands trembled on her needlework. The thought of speaking publicly about her shame made her stomach churn. I don't know if I can, she whispered. You can, Reverend Josiah insisted gently. God gives us strength when we need it most. And think of Mateo. He needs you to speak. Truth for both of you now. She touched her swollen belly, feeling the baby move. You're right. she said finally. "I have to try. For all three of us." The preacher squeezed her hand before rising to leave. "I'll keep searching for that deed. You get some rest." But sleep wouldn't come. Mary Ellen spent the night in her rocking chair, sewing by lamplight, rehearsing what she would say in court. Each stitch strengthened her resolve. She would face her father, face the town's judgment, face everything that frightened her. Dawn found her still awake, the baby's blanket finished in her lap. She watched the sun rise through the window, thinking of Mateo in his jail cell. 2 days until the hearing. 2 days to find her courage. She pressed her hand to the window glass, cold and clear as her purpose now. "I won't let you stand alone," she whispered to the morning air. "I promise." The territorial courthouse buzzed with whispers as Mary Ellen stepped through its wooden doors. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to walk straight back down the center aisle. Just as Mateo had taught her, every bench was filled. Miners, shopkeepers, and ranchers' wives pressed together, eager for the spectacle. She glimpsed familiar faces from town, some sympathetic, others cruel with judgment. Near the front, Deputy Carter nodded slightly, respect in his eyes. Her father sat at the plaintiff's table, freshly shaved but still reeking of whiskey. The sight of him made her hands tremble, but she clenched them in the folds of her best dress, the one she'd carefully mended by lamplight. 2 hired gunmen lounged behind him, their weapons conspicuously displayed. Judge Matthews settled his considerable bulk behind the bench, arranging his papers with obvious satisfaction. When the bailiff led Mateo in, Mary Ellen's breath caught. 3 days in jail had left him unshaven and hollow-eyed, but his spine was straight as a pine tree. Their eyes met briefly before he was seated at the defense table. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. "The matter of Harper versus Boone." Samuel Harper rose unsteadily, waving a stack of papers. "Your Honor, I have here documents proving my legal authority over my daughter. This man," he jabbed a finger at Mateo, "took her unlawful from my protection." "The court recognizes these documents," Judge Matthews declared, barely glancing at them. "Mr. Boone, how do you plead?" "To the charge of kidnapping?" Mateo stood slowly. "Not guilty, Your Honor. I prevented the unlawful sale of a free woman." "Free?" Samuel Harper spat. "She's my flesh and blood, my property by law until married." Mary Ellen's face burned as townspeople murmured. She fixed her eyes on a patch of sunlight on the floor, drawing strength from its warmth. "I have witnesses." Her father continued, "Who'll swear she went willing with this man after he paid coin for her like common goods? That's trafficking plain as day." "If I may, Your Honor." Reverend Josiah's calm voice cut through the whispers as he rose from his seat. The preacher approached the bench, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Judge Matthews frowned. "This is irregular, Reverend. You weren't called as witness. I come as officer of the church and keeper of records." The preacher opened his portfolio. "I have here a deed of property, legally filed and witnessed, signed by Sarah Harper before her death 5 years ago." Mary Ellen's heart leaped. Her mother's deed, he'd found it. The courthouse fell silent as Reverend Josiah handed the document to the judge. "This deed grants 40 acres along Clear Creek to Mary Ellen Harper, to be held in trust until her 20th birthday." The preacher's voice carried to every corner. "That birthday passed 2 months ago. By territorial law, she's a landowner in her own right, and thus a free woman." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Judge Matthews' face darkened as he examined the deed, but even he couldn't deny the official seal and signatures. "The document appears genuine," he grudgingly admitted. Samuel Harper surged to his feet. "That paper's worthless. She's carrying a bastard child. She needs a father's guidance." "No." Mary Ellen's voice rang out clear and strong, surprising even herself. She stood, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "I will speak." The judge scowled, but gestured for her to continue. Mary Ellen walked to the front of the courthouse, feeling every eye upon her. Her legs shook, but Mateo's steady gaze gave her courage. "My father tried to sell me like livestock," she began, tears streaming down her face. He would have let drunk minors bid for sport if Mateo hadn't stopped it. "Those $2 weren't purchase money. They were the price of my shame, which my father was happy to collect." Uncomfortable shuffling filled the gallery. Several women dabbed at their eyes. "Mateo Boone gave me shelter, respect, and safety. He taught me to split wood and set snares. He never laid a hand on me except in kindness." She turned to face the crowded room. "I am a landowner now, by my mother's blessing. I claim my freedom before God and this court." A long silence followed. Even the judge seemed moved, though he fought to maintain his stern expression. "The deed is valid," he finally declared, "and there is no law against offering shelter to a free woman of property." He cleared his throat. "Case dismissed, Mr. Boone. You are free to go." The bailiff removed Mateo's shackles. Mary Ellen's father stormed out, his gunman slinking after him. Townspeople began filing out, many pausing to nod respectfully to Mary Ellen or shake Mateo's hand. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as people filed out into the crisp mountain air. Mary Ellen stood quietly by the weathered railing, still trembling from the morning's events. But something had changed. Where before there had been sneers and whispers, now townspeople approached with measured respect in their eyes. Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife who had once turned her back when Mary Ellen entered the store, stepped forward with reddened eyes. "That was brave what you did in there," she said softly, pressing a wrapped loaf of fresh bread into Mary Ellen's hands. "Your mama would have been proud." Others followed. The seamstress offered scraps of fine baby flannel. The mercantile owner's wife promised credit at the store. Even gruff old Tom Wheeler, who ran the livery, shuffled up to mumble that she could stable her horse anytime, free of charge. Each gesture, small but sincere, helped wash away years of shame. Mateo stood a few paces back, watching with quiet satisfaction as the town's hearts slowly turned. His prison beard couldn't hide his smile when Deputy Carter approached to return his rifle and apologize for the arrest. "You're a good man, Boone," the lawman said, loud enough for others to hear. "This territory needs more like you." The ride home was peaceful, their wagon cutting fresh tracks through new fallen snow. Mary Ellen sat wrapped in Mateo's coat, cradling her precious bundle of gifts. Neither spoke much, but the silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Evening painted the mountains purple by the time they reached the line shack. Smoke still curled from the chimney. Reverend Josiah had tended the fire during their absence, leaving a pot of beans warming on the hearth. The familiar scent of pine smoke and coffee welcomed them home. Mary Ellen began setting out supper while Mateo tended to the mule. When he returned, stamping snow from his boots, she had 2 tin plates ready on the rough-hewn table. A single candle cast dancing shadows on the log walls. "Reckon we ought to celebrate," Mateo said, producing a small paper sack from his coat. Inside were 2 sugar cookies from the hotel restaurant, an unheard-of luxury in their simple lives. Mary Ellen's eyes welled up at the thoughtful gesture. They ate in companionable quiet, sharing glances across the table. The fire popped and hissed, driving back the mountain cold. When the plates were cleared, Mateo cleared his throat. "Been doing some thinking," he said carefully, studying his calloused hands. "About what your pa said in court, about you needing guidance." He looked up, his eyes earnest in the firelight. He was wrong about most everything, but maybe he was right about one thing. Not guidance like he meant, but partnership. Someone to share your land and life with. Mary Ellen's heart began to race as Mateo stood and walked to the hearth. He knelt beside her chair, his movements deliberate and gentle. "That day in town, when I laid down those $2, I never meant to buy you. No person has the right to own another." His voice grew husky with emotion. "You were never mine to purchase. But if you'll have me, I'd be proud to be yours." Tears spilled down Mary Ellen's cheeks as his meaning became clear. "Are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'll marry me," Mateo said simply. "Not because you need protection or because of the baby, but because I've grown to love you. Your strength, your kindness, the way you hum when you're happy and pray when you're afraid." He took her hand in his rough one. "I love how you face each day with courage, no matter how hard it gets." Mary Ellen could barely speak through her tears. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I'll marry you." Mateo's face transformed with joy. He helped her from her chair, and together they knelt before the crackling fire. The flames painted everything in warm gold as Mateo's strong voice lifted in prayer. "Lord, we come before you with grateful hearts," he began. "You've turned our sorrow to joy, our loneliness to love. We commit our lives and land to your keeping." "Amen," Mary Ellen added softly, her hand still clasped in his. Rising, Mateo drew her close, careful of her swollen belly. Outside, snow began drifting down in fat, lazy flakes, cloaking the world in pristine white. The gentle sound of it falling on the roof wrapped around them like a blanket, muffling all but the beat of their hearts. Through the cabin's single window, Mary Ellen could see her mother's land sleeping under its winter blanket. Soon spring would come, bringing new life and possibilities. But for now, in this moment, she was content to stand in the circle of Mateo's arms, watching the snow transform their world into something clean and full of promise. The fire crackled softly behind them, and Mary Ellen began to hum her mother's hymn. Mateo joined in, their voices twining together in the peaceful evening. No longer two lonely souls, but a family choosing love. The small church glowed with warm lamplight as dusk settled over the mountain town. Reverend Josiah stood before the altar, his well-worn Bible open in his weathered hands. Mateo shifted in his only suit, cleaned and pressed for the occasion, while watching the church door dot when Mary Ellen appeared in her simple calico dress. Sewn by her own hands, the scattered townsfolk drew in a collective breath. She walked down the narrow aisle with careful steps, one hand resting on her rounded belly. Her cheeks, once stained with frozen tears of shame, now flushed with joy. Mrs. Peterson dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. The mercantile owner's wife whispered to her neighbor, "To think we once scorned her." Others nodded, humbled by the memory of Mary Ellen's brave testimony in court. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Josiah began, his voice carrying to every corner of the humble sanctuary, "we gather to witness not just a union, but a testament to God's redemptive love." When Mateo and Mary Ellen clasped hands before the altar, whispers rippled through the small congregation. "She was bought for $2, someone murmured, "but now she's chosen for love." Their voices joined the others in singing "Amazing Grace," Mary Ellen's clear soprano rising above the rest. Tears sparkled in her eyes as she spoke her vows, transforming from an outcast to a cherished wife. After the ceremony, they rode home through the gathering darkness to their line shack. But it wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was their true home, filled with the warmth of shared prayers and gentle laughter. The fear that had once haunted these walls had no place here now. Inside, Mary Ellen lit the lamp while Mateo built up the fire. Its glow caught the simple gold band on her finger, not a mark of ownership, but a symbol of covenant love freely given and joyfully received. Heavy snow blanketed the forest as Mary Ellen's labor pains intensified. The line shack glowed like a beacon in the darkness, lamplight spilling through frosted windows. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Mary Ellen gripped Mateo's calloused hand as another contraction seized her. He supported her steadily, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. Hours passed like water flowing over stones, marked only by her quiet determination and Mateo's unwavering presence. "You're strong," he whispered, "strong as mountain oak." Near dawn, when the storm was thickest, Mary Ellen's final push brought their child into the world. A sharp cry pierced the cabin's warmth, strong and defiant. Mateo's hands trembled as he cleaned the infant, tears streaming freely down his weathered face. With reverent care, he wrapped their baby in the soft bonnet Mary Ellen had sewn during those long evenings by the fire. The tiny garment, crafted with hope and prayer, now held their greatest blessing. Exhausted but radiant, Mary Ellen cradled their child. "This little one," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "was born free." The words held all the weight of her journey, from auction block to cherished wife, from shame to dignity. Mateo kissed her forehead tenderly. "Free and loved," he promised, his voice rough with joy. "We'll raise this child in faith and honor." Outside, dawn broke over the snowbound forest. Sunlight caught the fresh snow on the pines, turning each branch to diamond brilliance. Inside the warm cabin, a family born of redemption and choice held each other close, their prayers of thanksgiving rising with the morning light. "Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.